You are listening to the podcast When Life Gives You Lemons, presented by me, Emma Levy. Having worked with elite athletes for most of my career, it's always intrigued me that a significant number of high-performing individuals have encountered some form of adversity earlier in their lifetime. My fascination into this grew when I had my own brush with adversity, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer in May 2020, in the midst of the global pandemic at the age of only 36. During this period, I questioned whether it was my positive mindset or maybe something deeper, which enabled me to bounce back and to train and compete for a triathlon just 1 month following completion of all active cancer treatment. The goal of this podcast is to explore this concept further by meeting a variety of high-performing individuals who have experienced adversity but who have come back stronger. Today I'm welcoming British artistic gymnast Becky Downie to the podcast. Becky is a double Olympian, multiple world, European and Commonwealth medalist. Becky's long and illustrious gymnastic career has had many highs and lows, and she has most recently peaked with an amazingly successful European Championships just this year, where she won a gold medal in the team event and an individual silver medal on bars. As you will hear, this was truly a remarkable comeback from a few years filled with significant turmoil and unimaginable emotional and physical challenges. Becky, thank you for coming to talk to us today. I am really looking forward to hearing your story. I know you are one of 5 siblings. Can you tell us, how did you get into gymnastics in the first place?
Yeah, just through my parents weren't particularly sporty. My dad always kind of played football and cricket, but gymnastics was not anything that kind of ran in our family. And it was mainly just through a friend at school, always doing like cartwheels and tricks in the playground. And I just begged and begged my parents to take me, and it stuck, I guess.
How old were you when you started?
I started when I was 7, and now I'm 31. So it's been a very long journey.
And what do you specialise in?
My best event is bars, so that's kind of my priority apparatus, and then beam is always kind of my secondary apparatus. But since my injury over the past year, it's just been a process to kind of get beam back. But it's exciting to see where hopefully we can take things over the next year or so now.
Yeah, and beam, for anyone that doesn't know, is that really narrow beam, isn't it? Where you basically flip over it, like along it.
Yeah, it's pretty much, I'm a size 6 foot, and it's pretty much the size of my foot. I always feel like it's an advantage if you have slightly smaller feet because you just get a bit more room, but pros and cons, I guess.
Wow. I mean, when I watch that, I just can't believe people don't fall off it more often.
I think it's just, I don't know, I guess lots of practice, and it definitely is a really scary sport. I think people think that when we kind of get to this top level, like it's not really that scary and it's just all autopilot. And I think by the time you get to a competition, in some ways it's autopilot, but it is scary majority of the time.
Yeah, I work with the British divers, and I had Matty Lee on the podcast a few weeks ago, and we discussed how, he's scared every day. Every time he dives off that 10-meter board, they're scared. And I suppose it's the same with you guys. Even though you do it all the time, it's so scary because you know the consequences of if it goes wrong.
Yeah, there's some skills that are definitely easier that you can kind of do that I feel like everyone has bits that they are comfortable with. For me personally, like on a piece like beam, I don't like going backwards. Some gymnasts, that doesn't really phase them, but that's something that's always like not sat very comfortably with me. And I think bars is always quite a scary piece. Like I train over the foam pit most of the time, so the fear factor in training is quite low for me on bars. But then once you actually get to competition surfaces, then it does get scarier.
So what has been the highlights of your career so far?
Really good question. I'd probably say still a big one was making my first ever Olympic team. I think just being able to call yourself an Olympian is just such an honor that you can kind of carry for the rest of your life. And then next to that, I would say winning my first European title. It took me 7 years to kind of do it. And I think now just seeing the change in British gymnastics from when I started to kind of where we are now, like such a high performing program, I was kind of part of that generation that was kind of on that climb, I guess. So to kind of achieve that medal after so many years, that was a really special moment. And then probably my 2019 world silver medal, because I think that took me 10 years or something crazy like that. But yeah, it's been a journey for sure.
Yeah. And in my introduction, I did allude to the fact that you've had quite a challenging journey. I imagine a particularly difficult time for you was around summer 2020 when you and Ellie, your sister, who was also a British gymnast, put out your joint statement into the abusive behaviour that you had both experienced within British gymnastics, sharing allegations of emotional abuse and weight shaming. For the listeners that might not know, do you mind if I summarise the key points?
Yeah, of course.
So you stated that within British gymnastics, there was that the abusive behaviour was so ingrained in your daily lives that it became totally normalised. You didn't realise how wrong it was, and it's taken many years to realise it was wrong and to come to terms with it, and that there was an environment of fear and mental abuse. Are you happy to go on and talk about this?
Yeah, it's still a challenging subject. I mean, like I say, when you get into the sport of gymnastics, you are so young, and I think that's really where a lot of the problems started, because you aren't mentally developed, you don't know any different, and you kind of are relying on those environments and the support teams, I guess, within there to kind of, I don't know, it just adds to your upbringing, if that makes sense. And I think it was just a space where you would like go to school and school would be normal and home would be normal. And for us, it was always just gymnastics. So you would never really expect to go to school and be upset or be in tears, or same when you're at home. But when you got to the gym, everyone was crying most of the time. And I don't know whether it was because it was just physically so difficult sometimes. It obviously is a really scary sport, but none of that was really communicated very well when you were little. It was just kind of get on the apparatus, you train hard and you compete kind of thing. And as I got older, I think that's where the problem, not necessarily problems, I guess challenges came, is when athletes were getting older, were getting voices, and then we're trying to challenge that system. I think that was probably one of the toughest points, like probably late teens, early 20s, and like breaking that mold and challenging what coaches believed was, but it was always a set way. And then trying to create change and change that. And I think to have everything finally come out, I mean, we knew it was only a matter of time. It was really crazy how it came out, how it did. And I guess through the lockdown, with everybody being at home, it kind of in some ways really did capture everyone's attention, because it was such a big case.
Yeah.
But
so do you think it was sparked by the documentary, the Athlete A documentary about American gymnastics? Do you think that kind of got into everyone's head and started to make you think about it?
Yeah, definitely. I remember as soon as I actually watched that, there was a completely different side to that, with their Larry Nassar scandal. But I think the underlying tones of that documentary, of how overtrained the gymnasts were, the weight shaming, there were so many things that I guess just really resonated with me. And so many of my older teammates, we were kind of then all popping up to each other being like, oh, have you seen this? Like, how did you feel about it? And the fact that it just felt so relatable to so many of us, like, I guess that's kind of where all the red flags were. And I guess we knew it, but to kind of have it actually out there to the world was quite crazy for us. And I remember doing a post quite early on, just on my social media, kind of just detailing how I felt about watching it and how I'd spoken to teammates. And then I guess it did create that snowball effect for then people to just, I guess, find their voices and have the courage to really then speak and then I guess act on it.
Yeah. And you and Ellie, your sister, am I right in saying you were the only two current squad members of British gymnastics who spoke out?
Yeah, I think a lot of the girls at the time had retired. So for me, regardless of when I chose to retire, and I think regardless of whether Athlete A came out or not, I was always going to speak. And it was something that I couldn't really understand why a lot of retired gymnasts hadn't already done it. And I guess it is still that kind of culture of fear, even though they had finished, like so much, you carry so much with you that stays with you for the rest of your life. And I think once one person then was brave enough to do it, I think it really did help that more people were then just sharing their experiences. So many just from different age ranges, different Olympic cycles, different sides of the sport, like whether it was artistic or rhythmic or trampolining. Like it was quite scary how ingrained it was in so many places. But I definitely think it was needed. It was a hard period, but I think it was needed to create the change that we're seeing today.
Were you scared to speak out?
Honestly, at the time, not really. I mean, we were anxious to put out how we felt. But as soon as kind of it started to kind of hit TV and hit media here, it was just something that me and Ellie both felt we had such big voices in gymnastics, and we were like, we can't just sit back and pretend like this hasn't all happened, because it has happened and it's so real. And the experiences mainly that we'd had, we just didn't want anybody else to have to go through that again. And I think one of the things that I think for us going forwards was so difficult was, I think a lot of people think we just did it kind of on a whim. Like, we had so much thought that went into how we were going to put it out, what we actually wanted to say. We were really careful. We didn't want to name any coaches publicly, because it's really hard kind of emotionally for us. Like, we've worked with a lot of those coaches. We still had good relationships with some of them. And even though I've had challenges with maybe a lot of the coaches, or coaches that I've worked with growing up, I learned so much from them. So, it was already a huge change for us on our Olympic year. And I think there was a lot of miscommunication. The Gymnast Alliance did cause a lot of tension within the program. And yeah, it just definitely didn't work in mine and Ellie's favour.
Yeah. I mean, when I was researching before today and I was looking at that kind of Tokyo Olympic selection thing, am I right in saying that at the trials you placed first on bars and second on beam?
Yeah, that was it was really hard to kind of understand the process behind it, I guess, because the team, I mean, it was typical, that the team happened to have gone from a 5-person team to a 4-person team. I think that's where a lot of the problems started for me.
Right.
And there was 2 different routes to qualify. Like, you could qualify a team, so you get 4 athletes, but then you could also qualify as an individual. Well, from the get-go, I never wanted to qualify as an individual. And I don't think I fully understood the rules of like the whole route to the Olympics, like both sides. But I just knew I always wanted to be in the team, and those conversations were had way before Gym Alliance, like with what I wanted to do, and everyone was very aware that I would bring 2 pieces to the table. That was kind of my thought process. And I guess as time kind of went on, didn't help, as I say, as our national coach kind of was then out the program. We had somebody new in, and we had up and coming ones that I guess weren't necessarily big stars on the program when the games were a year supposed to be in 2020, and then it obviously changed 2021. There was a lot of changes that kind of happened, and I just think a lot of lines were blurred, I guess. I mean, there was a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations that I had behind the scenes, which again, I've not spoken about a lot of this still properly. And there's a lot that I will save until I've retired. But there's just a lot to me that didn't add up. Like, conversations were had, and the conversations were had that didn't then transpire. And I think that's why it was so difficult and so hurtful for me. And as I say, a lot of it didn't feel like it was an accident.
Yeah. And to make things even more challenging, your brother passed away the eve of the Olympic trials unexpectedly at the age of 24. Is that right?
Yeah.
So on top of all of that that's going on in the background with the selection process and the allegations that you'd made and being ostracized by national coaches, you then have that significant trauma. Where did you then find that strength to come back for those trials?
I mean, I think it was just such a shock initially. I knew I needed to just be home with my family for a few days. And then it was kind of like, for me, I'd worked too hard to not try and see this through. Like, I felt like I was doing some of my best gymnastics. There was a lot of challenges I was facing kind of within that year, but I just worked too hard to not try. And I also knew that my brother wouldn't want me to just not try because of that. So yeah, it was hard. I was back in the gym within 4 days. And at first I was kind of like, I need to see if I actually can do this. Like, I don't know how I'm going to be when I get in the gym, like what my headspace would be like. It wasn't long until it was then decided I could have another trial, and kind of what the setup was around that. That was a really challenging time. There was a lot of implications going into that, which again, I've not spoke about a lot of that properly, but that's a story for another day. But yeah, just getting to those trials was a lot. And I look back now and like, I still don't really know how I did it. And there's a lot that I think I still carry now. Like, I just pushed through so much. And for the space of at least a year, I think there was just so much that I don't really know how I got through it all. I guess it was just on to the next thing. And having that time now, I guess, just to sit back and process it and just try and make sense of it all, really.
Yeah. Have you given yourself that time to grieve yet?
That's a good question. in some ways, like, yeah and no. I think Josh is definitely like a subject that we don't kind of shy away from as a family. Like, he's brought up a lot in conversation. Like, whenever we kind of do a family event or do things, like, he's always still with us. But I've not really had a huge significant period of time off to kind of just not train, not do anything. But I think in some ways having that training has been allowed me, I guess, to be a bit of a distraction, if that makes sense, and kind of just continue some normality. And I think it definitely helped me as well at times.
Yeah. And then, you showed another moment of unbelievable resilience after those Olympic trials when you were told no. You ploughed on, and I imagine you were just beset by grief and absolute devastation. But you trained through the summer to get to the World Championships, where unfortunately things didn't go for you how you wanted them to go. And I've read that when it was over, you said you felt just totally burnt out and you felt relief that it was all over. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I think that was probably, for so many different reasons, one of the hardest competitions I'd ever got through. Like, the prep camp was really difficult. Just trying to, I guess, train through the summer. Like, I knew what my motivation was, but I don't know now, looking back, whether was it worth it? I'm not sure. I think it gave me a lot of confidence to know that although I went there and I didn't make the final that I wanted to make, going through what I went through. And I mean, I didn't do my plan routine. I changed my routine pretty much overnight just to try and simplify and stay on the bar, just because I was so mentally burnt out. I was at a point where I couldn't have actually made my routine. And it was also at a point where if I even had made the final, I highly likely would have pulled out of that final because I was so done. But I think to go there and know that I managed to still score what I scored, not doing my best work, going through everything, I think that was probably the biggest thing I could take moving forwards, was that, like, I actually am still good enough and it's all still in there.
Yeah.
And I think even over the past year, that's something, or the past couple of years since, I guess, that point, that was probably one of the biggest things for me, was like, am I still good enough and can I still do this? Because I felt so confused about my gymnastics abilities, really, like, from scores that I was getting here throughout those trials, to me it didn't feel like it was marrying up with some of the work that I was doing at times. And it just, yeah, it confused me a lot. And I think just to know that it was still in there just gave me that confidence to be like, once you've actually had a bit of a rest and had time to reset, like, you'll be fine, kind of thing.
So it was actually probably quite a positive move then, looking back, for you to push yourself to get to those games.
Yeah, it was definitely, it was hard, more than hard. And I was
imagine.
like, once I'd finished out there, I mean, I think a lot of the team that know me well, I'm generally quite a chatty person. I just removed myself from everyone. I didn't come out my room for about 3 days. Wow. I just needed time to I guess, just to process what on earth had happened to me that year. It kind of sucks that I was in Japan and I couldn't just instantly leave. But at the same time, I think everybody really understood where I was at and just respected that I needed time and space. And that, I guess, I had time off when I came home. When I came home, I had 2 to 3 weeks off, which in the grand scheme of things is still not maybe that long. But I made the decision then to switch gym clubs, and kind of then looked at everything from a completely different perspective, fresh start, started again.
That's really good. And then what had happened as well is your statement, amongst other allegations of mistreatment, had prompted British Gymnastics, to carry out an independent review into the system, hadn't it? And then the results of this white review were released in the summer of 2022. Yeah. How did you feel reading the results of this report? Which basically said that there was problems within the system, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was very lengthy. I definitely didn't read the whole thing, but reading majority of things, I was certain points that it was kind of like, I guess it just validated everything that you've been trying to fight for so many years, and it was actually, like, fully out there to everyone. And I think especially the parts about the weight, there was so many years battling challenges like that, like behind the scenes, and
like weight shaming stuff.
Yeah, and to be fair, before the review had come out and before Gymnast Alliance happened, we had actually stopped being weighed. It took a long time. We only stopped being weighed in 2018, I think it was, maybe 2018 or 19. I can't remember which year it was. But even then, like, that's too late. Like, it shouldn't have gone on how it did for so long. But there were already changes that were happening. It was just that, I don't know, I guess the review has forced a lot more change, and change that was, so, in my opinion, so desperately needed. And it is strange to be a part of it now where it has changed so much. And I think it's quite hard for me now to, in some ways, accept all the changes because of how I've seen things and how difficult they were to what they are now. But I think for the next generation, they won't know any different. And hopefully all they're going to know is the positive side of it, which is all we can ask for.
Yeah, and I'm sure that you are integral in that change. So well done. What specific positive changes have you noticed within the setup?
I guess changes that I have been battling for, I don't know, at least 10 years. One of the big things was we're a team sport, but we're also individuals. So it just gets really tricky. And it's taken so long to kind of get through to coaches that everyone, as much as we are a team, we're an individual. And what works for one gymnast does not work for every single gymnast. And people are good at different events, people's bodies are different, have different injuries. And to adapt a training program, which kind of seems like common sense, you see it in a lot of sports, like sports science and medicine, there's so much research behind it all. It just wasn't being implemented in our programs. And that's probably one of the biggest changes now. Like, people are actually being individualized and from much younger ages, which is how it always should have been. So that's one big positive. I think probably the biggest thing going forward, and I think problems that I'd seen from myself, from Ellie, like teammates, I guess, over the years, was the weight thing. And I don't think coaches really understood how that stuck with a gymnast throughout the rest of their life. I don't believe they intentionally thought that they were all like, I don't think they were doing it to harm us, potentially. I think they did believe genuinely that they were doing it always to help, but I think the repercussions that it caused were like detrimental. And I think it really depends, kind of like anything in life, like where you're at, what your mental state is like, as to how much it can and can't affect you. Some kids are pretty robust and can just ignore bad comments and it doesn't phase them that much. And other kids, it can really send them spiraling, like, in a bad way. And I think kind of actually acknowledging that and not putting pressure on things as well, is definitely, going forwards, is going to be much better.
Yeah. So do you think some of that weight shaming did lead to some eating disorders down the line for some gymnasts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I saw it in some teammates. I saw how affected Ellie was massively by it. And I feel like Ellie's case was one of the main reasons why we stopped being weighed, which we had one of our pretty much top all around athletes that we'd ever had wanting to quit because of her weight. And it was ridiculous. And she was so unhappy at the time. I remember Ellie sat down to me and said that she didn't feel like she fit in our sport anymore, because most gymnasts were like tall and skinny, or like smaller and more muscly, but Ellie was kind of both. She was tall, but she was really muscular. And she was like, and instead of being like praised for it, because I was saying to her, like, most people can't do the skills that you can do, like your body allows you to do that. She just felt like she was being penalized constantly for it, because she was always being told she was too big. And when she kind of told me that, she sat down to me and cried, and I was like, kind of like, enough's enough. And the team were, I think, only trying to help, but she was getting it from so many people. Like, she would go to do a strength and conditioning, and our strength and conditioning person would be like, oh, how's your weight? National coaches, how's your weight? Personal coaches, how's your weight? Physios were asking the same. I'm like, it's too much. She's a young girl. She doesn't need it. And I remember speaking to some of the staff, and they were like, well, what if she quits? I said, then she quits. Wow. It's her career and it's her choice, like, you can't force this on her anymore. And I did then at one point sit down and have a good conversation with one of the national coaches and explained. And I think when they understood really how it had made her feel, they were like, that was never our intention. And I said, I'm not saying that it was, but I'm just telling you, this is what you've caused. And at the time, I can't remember how old Ellie was, like 18 or something like that. I'm like, you've given her body confidence issues for life. And that's terrible. Like, she has an incredible physique. Just because she isn't your stereotypical gymnast doesn't mean that she hasn't got a great body. And that's when things really started to change. Like, literally from that conversation, we weren't weighed anymore. And I wasn't sure at first. If occasionally you go to camp and they just forget. So I wasn't sure, like, for the first few, if like it was generally, we actually aren't being weighed anymore. But that change was pretty much instantly made, which was great. And she was so much happier. And I think even for me, I was 26 at the time when we stopped being weighed. Like, that's crazy to be weighed and be monitored for all of those years, to then just to have that relief. Oh, I'm not going to be weighed this morning. Yeah, wow. It was like so nice.
Has it had an impact on you now with your eating, do you think?
There's definitely things that stay with you. Like, if I ever eat any bad food, I always feel bad for eating it. And I think because we were always brought up that we weren't allowed it, I've always been really mindful of carbs because they were pulled from our diet, or when we were seen eating them, we were told off a lot of the time. Really? Growing up.
So you were training 30 hours a week as a kid and not allowed to eat any carbs.
Yeah, it was crazy. We were always kind of encouraged at breakfast, like cereal or toast or anything like that was not a bad thing. But even when it came to like lunches and dinner, like, they wouldn't really want you to have sandwiches. They would always want you to have salad. It was like salad and soup all the time. I remember when I did my first Commonwealth Games when I was 14, one of the coaches there said that for dinner we could only have cereal or salad. And I was out there for a month. And I was like, looking back, that's such poor education. Like, it's actually crazy. And I didn't really like salad at the time. I was only 14. So I was like, well, it's cereal then. But that's just, like, where's your recovery in that? It just, and again, it was just, I don't think they were doing it to necessarily punish us. I just think it was a massive lack of education, but it was just so damaging at times.
Oh my goodness. I'm just so pleased things have changed for the positive. But sadly, Ellie, your sister, did retire, didn't she, at the beginning of this year? And she's still quite young to retire. How old is she?
23.
23. How was that for you? Has that affected you since she's left the sport?
Not really, because I think we've always had very different mindsets. And like, for me, I had a big period of my career when Ellie wasn't really a part of it before. It's kind of strange now knowing that finishing it, I always thought we'd finish it together, or at least I'd finish and she'd maybe carry on. But I'm just really proud of her for sticking to her guns and doing what was best for her, because we've always been compared for so many years. We're completely different people. And we've both been through a lot of challenges, but she was just generally so unhappy. And she's so much happier. Like, it was definitely the right decision for her at the time. And like I've always said, no amount of medals or money is worth your happiness. And I think it was a really tough decision for her. It wasn't an easy one that she was like, oh, I'm just done with it now. Like, there's a lot that comes off the back of it. And I think she'll probably will always miss like being on the comp floor. But at the same time, she was suffering too much and it just wasn't worth it.
No, and if she's happier now, it was the right decision for her, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
What stands out to me, Becky, is that you went to the 2008 Olympic Games and then sadly you missed out on the 2012 Games in London, but you then got back up and you got selected for the 2016 Games, Olympic Games in Rio, and then you missed out on the 2020 Games in Tokyo. And your gymnastics story definitely isn't a fairy tale, but you seem to consistently just pick yourself up and up again, you know, having just, like we said, had a very successful European Games. And I haven't mentioned the fact that you had quite a significant injury in the months leading up to that. So you're always, you know, you just keep coming back. Where do you get this motivation and this unbelievable drive from, do you think?
I honestly just think it's natural. So many people always say to me, like, I don't know how you've done it. And I can look back and I'm not really sure sometimes, but it's just in me. I think I naturally have a high pain threshold, which has definitely helped in the sport. And I just guess as I've got older as well, just being able to put things into perspective and just use my experience, I think, to my advantage. Like, there's so much growing up. Like, I wish I knew what I knew now, like 10 years ago. Like, I always had the talent, but there was so much that I look back on that I know was wrong. And I didn't really have, I guess, a lot of say in a lot of it. Like, I always trusted the people around me to know what was best for me. And I guess it got to a point where probably especially after Rio, where I was still questioning things, but I just tried to, in some ways, just ignore what I was feeling and just go with what people were telling me a bit more. And then when that still didn't work out, I was like, I know that I'm right, or at least I'm right for what works for me. And then that was a really big challenge of trying to get what I needed, not so much at home, but when I then got into those national environments. And that was been something, like I said, I've been battling it like my whole career. And to now, it's really hard to kind of go into a space and people be like, well, what do you want? And like it's really, I still find it really strange, but in the best way. And I think it can only help. And I think that's one of the reasons as well why you are seeing more success within the program, because one, the girls are being looked after better, and they're having choices.
Yeah, you can take
and if it's coming from you,
ownership of
yeah,
your programs. It's very
yeah,
positive.
and if it's coming from you and you want to do it, and you're going to be successful.
Yeah. So do you see yourself as a resilient person?
Yeah, I think so.
And you said you think you've just got it. So do you think you were born resilient, or do you think that all the challenges that you've encountered along the way have made you more resilient?
Probably a bit of both. I mean, I in some ways, so much has happened. It's been really difficult and challenging, but I also know I wouldn't change any of that, because long term I want to coach, and what I've learned, I think you could never teach. And I'm just really excited to hopefully one day pass that on. So I wouldn't change any of it. And I think it's kind of molded me into the person that I am, and also hopefully the coach I'll be. There's a lot that I try, like I guess trial and error, that I learned from myself, but then also from when Ellie came up, I always tried to look at, well, I've made these mistakes, like I don't want her to make the same ones, and try to always kind of advise and guide her as to what really I felt didn't work. And I think that did work for her. There was a lot that she kind of managed to escape, I guess, in those ways. So yeah, I'm excited to see what I can then what impact I guess I can hopefully have on future athletes.
Yeah, well, you definitely seem to love the sport, which I think is important. And it sounds like you'll be a brilliant coach.
Thank you.
Have you used any specific strategies which you think have helped drive you forward over your long career?
It's a good question. Not really. I guess I'm naturally always quite a person that likes to plan. I like to have a plan, like to plan ahead. Um, and I guess just learning from my mistakes. So when things have gone well, I kind of, after every competition, every year, whatever, just assess what have I found helpful, what haven't I found helpful. And I genuinely really feel like I found a formula. Like I say, it might not work for everyone, but I definitely believe that it works for me. And I think just like, as well, just like listening to your body, listening to yourself. And I think because I was questioned on so much of that for so long, that's probably the thing I still find the hardest, is in like just trust, you know what you're doing. And when I'm like at home in my home environment, like I have a really good relationship with my coach now. I don't feel like I'm questioned that much, and I can just do what I need to do, which is great. It's just the national environment still, I think, they just hold so many bad memories for me, I think, there. And things are changing, but it's not as comfortable as a home space yet. As I don't know if it ever will be for me. But I think that's probably where like the biggest challenges now lie going forwards for me, I guess.
Yeah, I am aware that you've said a couple of times there's some things that you haven't spoken about that you said you'll speak about when you retire. Is that because you're scared of the consequences of speaking out any further?
I mean, from everything that I said, I'm glad that, like I say, I'm really proud that I did, because of the change that it created. Um, and yeah, I think now as well, I guess there is a bit of that fear factor there. I think people would respect it if I did. I don't think they wouldn't. But at the same time, I also wouldn't want any more noise for myself whilst I'm still trying to do this. Because I think, as I said, it's still really hard trying to just process and understand what the past few years have been for me. And even before that, like everything Gym Alliance based, like you always, I guess, carried it through, yeah, like your whole career, most of your life. And it's really strange for me now to have people that are bothered about it, because they weren't bothered about it for so long. And it's only a good thing, but it is really difficult as the athlete to be like, well, now you want to listen and understand, or now you want me to talk. But when I did actually talk, you didn't want to hear it. You know, it's like a really it's a really hard space to be in.
Yeah. So it's something that you've kind of got in your mind that you're going to deal with when it's the right time and the right place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, final question. If you could go back in time to when things were at their toughest, what do you wish you could have told yourself as you were going through those hard times?
Um, that's a good question. There's been so many, but I guess like I think from anything, I always try and draw the positives as like what can you learn from it and what can you take from it, and just that it will make you a stronger and more resilient person. I think it does. I say I don't know how I've done a lot of it, but I wouldn't have changed a lot of it either because I wouldn't know what I know now.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Becky. I am honestly astounded by your drive, determination, and unbelievable resilience. And I do think that this chat will inspire so many of our listeners. And I am sure I am not the only one supporting you towards Paris 2024 Olympics, because you fully deserve to win that elusive Olympic medal.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Becky. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.